Well, a little tench first cast this morning, and welcome to Specimen Series. And you join me at the beautiful Rocklands Mere fishery in Norfolk. And this little lake, it's proper float fisherman's paradise. It's stuffed full of tench and crucians, and the tench are anything from little tiny ones like the one I've just caught, and there are some slightly better ones. But the aim of the game today is just a nice fun day's fishing, try and catch numbers of tench and just enjoy a bit of float fishing. So I'm itching to cast that back out. There's bubbles all popping up around them lily pads. I've put a bit of hempen pellet in, and let's see if we can get one a little bit bigger than that first one.
Although I didn't expect to catch any huge tench at Rocklands Mere, I really enjoy the simplicity of float fishing, and more than anything, just getting a bend in the rod and catching plenty of tench.
Well, this one feels a little bit like a crucian rather than a tench, but that would be a bonus. No, it's a little tiny tench. Well, here's a tiny little tench, that one. It's like a jacuzzi out there. The amount of bubbles coming up is surprising how long it takes to get a bite sometimes.
It's a real treat to come and have a day's fishing at Rocklands Mere. James, the owner of the mere, has created something really special. In fact, there's no carp in the lake, it is just crucians and tench and a few silverfish. And it didn't disappoint on this trip. Early in the morning, the fish were really on the feed, numbers of bubbles in the swim, and the bites came one after another.
A little bit bigger. Well, this one's a little bit bigger, but the aim of the game today is not to catch any giant tench, but just enjoy some float fishing for tench. My fishing on the big pits this year, on the big gravel pits for tench, has been quite tough for some reason. They just don't seem to have woke up so much as they normally do. So coming here today, getting lots and lots of bites, seeing all that activity in the swim is really enjoyable. And I'm going to slip this one back, because quite often the early mornings, I've said this before, but early mornings and tench go hand in hand. So I'm going to try and catch a few more before that sun gets really high in the sky and perhaps puts them off.
I was really keen to cast back out. There was a huge amount of bubbles in the swim, numbers of fish feeding, and as soon as the float settled, I got one of those perfect lift bites and I was into another tench.
It's a lift bite and a half. Cue the montage of baby tench, eh?
Rocklands Mere is an absolute paradise for tench, hence there being so many tench in here. They breed every year and you catch tench of all different year classes and sizes. And introducing a combination of hemp seed and little krill pellets had definitely got them in a feeding frenzy, and I'll talk a little bit more about my bait choice later in the video.
Well, there we are, a hard fighting little male tench. That one absolutely pulled my arm off on the float gear, but I'm going to slip this back and I'm going to talk you through the setup that I'm using today. So first of all, the rod and reel itself. I've got a Drennan rod here, a specialist float rod in 13 foot. You want a slightly stepped up rod when you're float fishing for tench. Quite often you're fishing near lily pads and there's lots of weed about, and you have to use the rod to your advantage. So this rod here, 13 foot, will cope with the biggest of tench down to a little Advanta fixed spool reel loaded with 6-pound line. And I will fish 6-pound line pretty much straight through. If I do put a hook link on, it might be a slightly smaller diameter hook link, but it'll still be around 6-pound break and strain. And then the setup itself, I'm using the lift method because I'm fishing really close in here. I haven't got a cast very far, so I've got a nice delicate little float on. All my bulk shot is just above the hook. So I get two types of bite. The float either disappears like it does when you're normally float fishing, or the best bites when they pick the bait off the bottom, they lift that bulk shot off the bottom, and then the float lifts up in the water. And I'm quite itching to cast this back out. They're still fizzing, there's still loads of tench in the swim. So let's see if we can catch some more.
On these shallow, intimate types of venues, I find tench fishing is all about early mornings and the evenings, and on bright sunny days when the sun gets high in the sky, it can definitely slow up on the fishing front. So hence me trying to catch as many tench as I could early in the morning whilst they were fizzing like mad in the swim, because I knew in the back of my mind once it got bright and sunny, the fishing would become more and more tricky.
Well, I've just slipped those two tench back, and before I get fixated on that float again, I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to talk you through my bait choice today. And normally my favourite baits when I'm tench fishing has to be red maggots followed by worms. But the venue here at Rockland Mere, there is a lot of silverfish in here, there's rudd and roach in here, and if I fished maggots and worms today, I would get absolutely annihilated by those silverfish. So I've stepped the bait up a little bit, I've caught all the tench on little bits of luncheon meat as my hook bait today, and then I've been feeding a mixture of some krill pellets in 2mm and 4mm. I've dampened those pellets so I can squeeze them together into a ball, a bit like a ground bait, and just feed them into the swim nice and tightly. I've got a little bit of hemp seed mixed in with them as well. Then I have got a few other options. I've got good old sweet corn. Tench definitely love sweet corn. And I have got a few expander pellets that I softened by soaking them in some water overnight. So I've got a few bait choices, but as they seem to be liking the luncheon meat so much, I'm going to stick with luncheon meat on the hook. And I'm gagging to cast it back out there. There's plenty of bubbles still. Like I said, it has slowed up a little bit in this bright sunshine, but they are still feeding. There's still bubbles rising, so I'm sure I can catch a couple more. It's a bit windy. Good cast, Phil. It's been a really enjoyable morning's fishing, and they have got smaller as the day's gone on. This one feels a little bit better, but I'm probably going to make it the last tench of the day. It's all about the morning fishing on this particular venue, and I've got another day planned tomorrow. I'm off to another gravel pit in the Wensum Valley, which is much deeper, where we might connect with a bigger tench or two. It'll be a different style of float fishing tomorrow because the lake's so deep. I'll be using the slider float, and the weather's supposed to change tomorrow as well. We're getting a weather front coming, so it might be a bit wet when I see you tomorrow. That could be good, and it could get those tench feeding. So I'm going to concentrate on getting this one in the net, and I think I am going to call it a day today, because I'm going to be up again bright and early tomorrow morning. Well, good morning. It's a slightly different day today than yesterday. We had bright sunshine yesterday, and we have got some wet weather coming in later, but that shouldn't come in till later this afternoon. So I've got a few hours of nice weather this morning to try and catch a few more tench on this slightly different pit today. It's much deeper, this pit, so I'm going to fish the slider float. It's about 10 foot deep, about 2 or 3 rod lengths out. And a little bit of a different baiting approach today. I've mixed up some ground bait with plenty of red maggots in it, and I'm going to ball ground bait in and then fish the slider float over the top. So hook bait wise, because there's not many silverfish in this lake, I'm going to use maggots and worms on the hook. I'm itching to get some bait in. I've seen a tench roll in this corner, and hopefully once we get a little bit of ground bait in, we'll see some fizzing and we can make that float disappear.
Without a doubt, worms and maggots are my favourite bait for tench. The only problem sometimes is they're a really good bait for all the other species, but due to the fact there is hardly any silverfish in the venue, they were the bait to use today. So I started off with half a dendrobina tipped with a red maggot, mainly just to hold the worm in place on the hook, but there was always the option of scaling down to a slightly smaller hook and just fishing a bunch of red maggots. I chose a swim that I'd never fished before on the venue and wasn't quite sure where the tench would turn up, so I baited 2 different areas, and I'd keep an eye on both the spots for any signs of bubbles coming up, and I'd let the tench tell me where I needed to fish.
There's been bubbles rising around my float constantly. Oh blimey. I was contemplating a change of bait. This one's not happy. Well, it feels like a good fish. Damn. That's a good one as well. It hurts.
I was absolutely gutted to lose that first fish, but what it did confirm is that worm was the bait to be using, and it lifted my confidence, and I felt another bite wouldn't be far away. I hadn't seen any activity straight in front of me in the swim. All the fizzing, all the signs of life were on the left hand side down by the tree line. So I kept introducing a little bit of ground bait to keep the fizzing going, and it wasn't long before I got my second chance.
Hopefully we can land this one. I lost what felt like a good fish a minute ago, but the swim's definitely livening up a little bit now. I'm getting a lot more activity a lot quicker. They absolutely pull your arm off on the float rod. It is great fun. Little chunky male by the looks of it. Come on fella, we just want to have a look at you. Have to be a bit careful getting the float stopped through the rod rings on a small float rod, but don't you dare, don't you dare. Here we go. They fight so hard, especially the males. I always think they fight harder than the female tench. I'll probably... Here he comes. Hurrah! Well, this definitely feels like the runners-up prize compared to the one that got away, but we've always got those one that got away stories. But I'm just pleased to be off the mark, the first tench of the morning, and there's definitely a lot more activity in the swim now. There's constant bubbles, the float isn't sitting still very long at all. It's just a matter of time until we get the second one, I think. Well, as I mentioned, I'm on the slider float today, and the reason for that is the depth of water. It's probably 10 or 11 foot deep out here. Let's just flick the float back out. And it makes it so much easier to fish, so I can now sink the line really quickly, then open the bail arm, and then just let line off the open bail arm, and it'll slide through the float until the float settles. And then I'm fishing in that nice deep water without the hassle of trying to cast a float set 10, 11 foot deep. You could fish any depth really. I have fished pits which are 15, 20 foot deep on the slider. So that's the method that I'm using today. Let's talk quickly about the hardware. Hold on, a nice little interruption. The tench certainly have come on the feed, and I promise we will talk a little bit about the rod and reel once I've landed the second tench of the day. A little hard fighting male, I guess. Well, this probably is a good opportunity to actually talk about the rod that I'm using. It's the same rod as I used yesterday. It's the Drennan Specialist Float, the compact version in 13 foot. It's got a clever little design. It's part telescopic, the butt section. So if, like me, you like to leave the rod set up, it's a lot easier to pack away, not having two great big long sections. And then on there, I've got one of our little Advanta reels. I'm fishing 6 pound line straight through. And I think I need every pound of that 6 pound line. Even these smaller tench are absolutely pulling my arm off. And everything that I've mentioned in the video, all the terminal tackle and the hardware, is all available from Angling Direct, whether you go on our website, on the MyAD app, or whether you pop into your local store. Whoa. Well, you'll have to excuse the noise. I've got a chap doing some strimming on the lake next door, but I've got my second tench of the morning. Another hard fighting little male tench. It is great fun, as I said, on the float rod. I'm going to slip this little fella back. I'm itching to cast out again, and I'll talk you through a little bit more in depth about the slider float setup and what floats I like to use and exactly how I set it up.
Well, before I talked you through the slider float setup I was using, I couldn't resist another cast as there were still bubbles rising in the swim, and I thought I might have been able to get another quick bite.
Well, the bubbles have died down a little bit in the swim, so I've wound the float in. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the slider float and exactly how it works. So the float itself needs to be a nice big float, and you don't want a self-weighted float. There's no weight on the float. I've got the float attached to a little Drennan float adapter just to ensure that that runs up and down on the main line really smoothly. Then above that float, I've got a little hard plastic bead, and then further up the line, I've got a float stop that I can set the depth of the swim. So I've plumbed the depth this morning, and I'm fishing a little bit over depth just to make sure that the bait lays on the bottom. And then beneath the float, coming down here, I've got a 3 gram Olivet, which is just about all my bulk shot, other than 2 little dropper shot on the hook link. And that Olivet just sits on top of a tiny little micro swivel that makes a nice joining point for the hook link. And as it happens, I've got 6 pound main line, and I have got a hook link of around 6 pound too, but it's a slightly thinner diameter of the hook link, just to try and get me a few extra bites. And it's really simple. When you cast the float out, the first thing I like to do is put the rod tip under the water, a few quick winds to sink all the line, then open the bail arm again, let the line flow off the reel. As the Olivet sinks through the water, the line slides through the float until the float stands up and you're fishing perfectly.
Well, the rain that was forecast never materialised, and instead we got some bright sunshine, which was all very nice, but it definitely slowed up the tench feeding.
I was starting to think the day was over a little bit as that sun got brighter. There wasn't a lot of activity in the swim at all, but being a stubborn old git, I kept feeding and kept fishing, trying to get one more. I'm now finally connected to something. Hopefully it'll be a tench. There's not actually many carp in this lake, so fingers crossed I can get it in and that we've got a tench. Pulling my arm off this one. It's been a day of angry male tench, but lovely fish this one. I take my time under the rod tip and make sure he doesn't get in those trees, and try my best to enjoy the moment. Come on. Here he comes. Lovely. Yay! Well, I'm really pleased with this one. It's always nice catching tench on the float, and my perseverance has definitely paid off because the swim did go a lot quieter, the bubbles had stopped, but every now and again there was a little bit of hope, a few bubbles, and then this beautiful tench has come along. And I am going to make this the last fish. It is getting bright and sunny, and unless I sit here till the evening, I think it's going to be really tough now. But if you haven't float fished for tench, you don't know what you're missing. It's so exciting. You definitely get hypnotized staring at that float, all the little bubbles, all the little dithers on the float, and then when you strike, all hell breaks loose. So if you fancy giving it a try, all the products I've used in this video, they are available from Angling Direct. There will be a link below that you can click on that will take you to all those products. But if you like this video, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Specimen Series.